what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at how we can take these queries and we could end up turning them into an application. A little bit more specifically, how we can take our code, which is interacting with a SQL-like database, and how we can use the results of those queries for a web application, an Express application. So one thing that I just wanted to point out, I added a couple of more tests that were here. And I want to show you a couple methods that I put in, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to build an application that has this functionality. So this is a program I had mentioned, something called Balsamic, where there's going to be three screens that we're looking at here. There's going to be this home screen, which basically just going to have some information about our site. This would be the root of our site. We're going to have a tab that's going to allow us to look at movies by year and movies by genre. And we're going to be able to go down two levels. And what I mean by that is that if we end up clicking on movies by year, we're going to see a listing of years and number of movies for those years. And if you click on one of those years, you'll see the movies from that year. And we're going to want to have a title and also have the ability to sort of move back and forth. So there's going to be a couple of different routes that we're going to create. You can see the structure of the route here, where we're going to have a year, and when we end up drilling down here, we're going to specify the actual year itself. So let me just make this a bit smaller. And if we end up doing the same thing, but we do it by genre, and again, the other thing here that we'll do is we'll pre-select these so you can see where you are. I'm going to use this to allow us to navigate, but also to show us where we are in the application, so adding a little bit of user experience. So here we would see all of our horror movies, or excuse me, the counts of our horror movies. I'm calling this a map. So the name would be horror, the number would be, or the count would be 500. You drill down, you can see the actual horror movies. So looking at the SQL that I have here, and again, it's nothing more complicated than we looked at before. All I'm doing here is that this is within my code, so that I'm going to be able to use these. I'm going to be able to export this object. Not only can it connect, but it also could query, and we used this quite a bit before. What I'm going to do is that instead of actually calling query directly, I'm going to say, give me my movie map for genres. And this is going to create my map for genres, where we're grouping by the genre, we're doing a count, descending, and internally we're calling our query object. So this is pretty helpful to us, and we're going to be able to use this in one of our routes. In our other routes, where we're going to get the movie by years, here's the query that we're going to do. Again, it's similar, but we're grouping by year. It's even less complicated because the year is actually on the movie table. And then we're going to end up querying. This is going to be used in another route. And then we have movies by year, where we pass in a year. We end up getting the movies by year. I ended up limiting this because one thing to sort of run something in the terminal and wait for the results, but if it's a web application, you really want to get the results back a lot faster. So we can talk about how we can sort of deal with this and maybe have some sort of paging algorithm. But here, we're calling our query. Our query is our SQL text that's here, and we pass in our parameters, which is the year. So again, a route is going to end up calling this method. And we've got something similar with movies by genre, which again is we're passing in a genre. And here, there's again, we have to sort of go down one level here to the movie genres table, but same sort of thing. And again, we're leveraging this query object that we have, so we can see how the query gets run, we can see how long it takes, and that sort of thing. So here's the code that I'm going to end up using for our routes. Now, there's one thing that's a little bit different here. I wanted to also show you that you have the ability to set up your application in a separate file than you would your server. You don't see anything here about the server starting. In fact, if you look at this file, the only thing that you see in here, go right up to the top, is that here's our Express app. We're actually going to be using this DB object that we ended up creating here. This is going to give us the opportunity to make our queries. We're using Swig. We're using the path module. I'm setting up Swig. Here's my Express app. Here's my one of my static routes. I'm setting up my engine for Swig, and I'm specifying that I'm using that engine. So this is all stuff that we've seen before, right? We've seen this a number of times. So here in my route itself, and again, I'm not starting my server here. I'm going to show you how I'm going to end up starting that server from another file. But the thing to see here is, first of all, this is nothing new, right? This is basically just a simple route. There's a couple of parameters that I'm passing here. Now, I'm keeping track of something that I'm calling mode. And there really are three different modes. There's a mode where I'm on my home page. There's a mode when I'm going to be looking at genres, whether it's the list or whether it's the list of all the genres or a particular genre. There's the idea of looking at the list of all the years and then looking at a particular year. So here you could see, again, if this is encapsulated, and this is something that you want to do, the call to our database is going to be wrapped up in our DB object. And here's our callback, just the same way that we ended up using it before. So again, this is going to have a SQL statement behind it when I call it. This is going to give me my movies by genre, and this is really going to be the counts of the movies by genre. And I'm going to use my results. This is going to be my map. So for every genre, I'm going to have a name, and I'm going to end up having a count. I put the URL here because what I want to be able to do is that I want to have a URL that I could then drill down to a particular genre. And I'll show you how I end up using that when we end up looking at our views. But the thing that you should know here is that I'm basically passing along to my view a string with a title, a string with a URL, a string with a mode, and this is going to be an array of results where each result has a name and a count. The exact same thing that's going on here. But this time we're getting the movie map by years. So our name is going to be a year, as opposed to, in this case, where we have the map and we have a map, and each value in that map is going to be an object. The name there is going to be the genre. The name here is going to be the year. The count is going to be a number, which is going to be the count of movies that fit into those categories. And again, I've got a different URL here by year, and my mode here is year. I also have my route where I drill down. So when I drill down, I'm going down into another level here, and here I'm getting movies by year, so I've got to pass a parameter in here, which I'm getting from my URL. And in this case, I've actually got a collection of movies. I still want to keep that same mode because I'm sort of in that section for years, but this time, instead of actually, I can't move forward anymore, but I'm going to have a back URL that allows the user to get from this route back to where they came from. And really the same exact thing with genre. So in this case, I'm getting the movies by genre. Here's the genre that ends up getting passed in here. And I'm going to end up sending to my view a title. Titles are a little bit more detailed. Movies by genre, I want to show the genre the same way that I want to show the year here. I'm going to end up getting my results from my query. Again, my mode is year here. It's going to be genre here. And the back URL is going to be different in both cases. So, one thing that you see here is that if you just thought about this as a black box, right, you could sort of think about, you have this object here. Again, it happens to be something that's part of our project, but this object, which is going to give us a collection, which is going to be, each value in the collection is going to be made up of an object, which is going to have a name and a count, where the name is going to be a genre. And you can think about that as, being a bit of a black box. We've got this movie map years, which we're calling here. Again, no parameters get passed here, okay? As opposed to these methods, movies by year, we need to pass the year in. Movies by genre, we need to pass the genre here. So once we end up having those routes, the next thing we have to think about doing is how we're going to go about starting the server. So one of the things that you might not have known, but it's something that you'll end up using when we end up using an Express generator to create an application, is that you can separate out your application from your server. So, here's our application code, which really is our set of routes. And if we really wanted to, we could actually break this part up into a movie routes. Maybe we'll end up doing that. But we're not starting our server here. Instead, the code here is what's going to start our server. And so what I'm actually doing here is that you have the ability to create a server and you could create a server by passing in an application. And again, that's going to set up because your server is going to be listening, and your server has to know what to do with the requests that end up coming in, and the application is going to have the routes that end up making that determination that says, hey, look, this request comes in, you end up doing that, right? That's based upon the routes that we have in our application. So this is my app that I created here. Notice that one thing that I'm doing here, I'm bringing my database in here, and I'm specifying, hey, look, before I start anything, I want to connect to my database. I really don't have to do that, but that pattern was helpful to us when we started doing testing. If, for instance, maybe we wanted to seed the database, we would have to make sure we connected to it, and we seeded it before we ended up possibly starting our server. So here I'm just putting this in a callback. Again, I'm assuming that I'm going to be able to connect to my database. I know I could because I ended up running my test before. But at this point, we would end up being able to create our server with our application, but we have to tell our server to listen. And this is where we end up passing in the port. So we're going to be able to run node, specifying a port first. So we'll specify a port, maybe 3000, and then we'll say, node, we want you to load the server.js file, or nodemon if we wanted to restart it if there were any changes. But the one thing that we're missing is our views. So we're going to get creative so we don't have a ton of views in this application. But again, we've sort of broken this thing up into pieces, which hopefully helps you understand it a little bit. But the whole part of sort of breaking this out is going to be pretty helpful, because if we ended up writing tests, we can actually write tests by just using we haven't done it here, but by just using our app file and our routes. But when we're actually running the application, we would end up needing our server. We'd end up starting our server. So we've got two different pages that we're going to use here. We're actually going to set this up. We're going to be sort of clever about it, so we don't have a lot of views. But the thing that I want you to see here is that, so right now the only thing that I have here is my layout page. And if we go and take a look at it, this is fairly standard stuff for a Swig layout, where we're using our static route that we set up, saying that anything that comes in with node modules, see if it's actually in the node modules folder. So we'll end up getting our bootstrap. But what I want to do is have some, Bootstrap gives me the ability to sort of turn tabs on and off by setting their active property. So here I'm using Swig, and if the mode is home, right, I'm going to put active on this home tab. If the mode is genre, I'm going to put active on the genre tab, and notice these links correspond to our routes. And if it's year, I'm going to put it on the movies by year. Here's my container, so I get a little bit of margin here, and here's a block for my content, which I'm going to be end up using in my other views. So the thing here, again, you've seen this before, but it's the idea that with a templating engine, what you're going to do is you're passing your data. And again, you can access that data inside of the layout if you want to, or in the pages that use the layout. So here we're accessing our genre. So what ends up getting served to the client's not going to see any of this, but if the mode was genre, this tab is going to be active, and you wouldn't see any class on this tab or this tab, and again, vice versa with the other ones. So this gives you an idea of what our layout ends up looking like. Again, it's pretty simple. It just has a couple of links on it. So you saw the layout page before, and the layout page really only has the navigation on it. But we're going to be using that layout page, and again, this is how Swig allows us to use a layout page. We're going to put this in our content area. In fact, we probably should indent this a little bit just so it's a little more obvious. But if you look at this, there's just a couple of if statements and a couple of for loops. If in fact I have a back URL, which is going to happen when I sort of drill down into a particular year or into a particular genre, I want to be able to go back. And again, I wanted to do this with one template. That was sort of what my goal was here. On the same token, there's going to be a map on my genres page, and there's also going to be a map on my years page. And I'm going to loop over that map. Again, remember that map is going to have a name and it's going to have a count. And all I'm doing here is looping over the map. So in the case of our genres, this would be, the name would be the name of a genre, and the count would be the count of that genre. So again, I've got this list where I'm dynamically generating these links, and this is in the case if I have a map, which is for 2 of my pages. And for the other two pages, which in our case are really our detail pages, they're really a list of movies, but we've gotten to that movies either from picking a genre or from picking a year. But in either case, I just look at the movie name and I end up getting the ranking as well. I use this badge class, so it ends up showing up in a little circle. But again, this sort of is the two parts of the layout that you have here. And again, you can build this out in pieces. But this is an example of how you can sort of leverage that one index page. And in our case, we're going to be able to use this for really 5 different routes. We use it for our home page too. There's nothing here if our mode is the home page, but that's okay. There's nothing there, but it still sort of defaults to that page, and we could put some instructional text there if we wanted to. So at this point, we could actually go in and run our server. You could see I actually started it before. So again, even though this is using the same index page, I could start off at home. See, some of these are a little bit slow because these queries are slow, and we could think about maybe optimizing them. But we could go and, again, this I limited to 500 movies just to keep it at a decent speed here. Download time, we could end up going back. We could do movies by year, right? We could pick a year. And again, one thing that you might want to do is to be able to drill down a little bit farther into here. And also, just one thing to sort of keep in mind here, in terms of our routes, we've got our movies by genre, so movies / by genre. We've got our movies by year. Notice there's no route for /movies. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. When we end up looking at Angular, we'll see that, and we look at routing, we'll see that actually, there's a name that Angular uses for that, which is an abstract route, meaning that you sort of have these nested routes, but you never have this sort of base /movies, and that's fine. That's just something that you'll end up seeing. But the other thing that you see here is as you drill down here, you could actually see the queries are running over on the right. So we could see those queries. And that could be pretty good. I mean, one thing that we might want to do here is actually add some more information so we see the amount of time that they took and that sort of thing. But again, we were able to sort of build that app. Again, not a ton of stuff that's going on here. And this, probably the trickiest part would be this part. You want to build it in pieces, but you start out with your data layer. Make sure that you're comfortable with your data layer. You could test it out, and then you could go in from there. You could end up setting up your routes. Right. Once you have your routes, you can make sure that you can start your server. And you're going to want to have your views. Our template engine is Swig. There are other template engines as well. But here's going to be our sort of main navigation. And here are our pages, and this index page. Again, the fact that there's a bunch of logic here is probably more based on the fact we want to use this page for a bunch of different purposes. So that's just an idea of how you can end up using something like SQLite database with Express. And the key here is, again, that things are going to be asynchronous, and probably the biggest sort of pain here would really be understanding that you can't end up sending anything back to the client until, in fact, you've gotten your data, in which case you could see our 4 routes. And again, different parts of the application are responsible for different things. The database part is responsible for interacting with the database. The routes are responsible for handling the routes, and the view engine is responsible for rendering the views. So there's a pretty good separation of concerns here, which is good, makes it easier to maintain the application. And again, one thing that you might want to do is to sort of maybe pull this out and put this into a separate route. So in fact, your main app could end up using a movies router, which would end up loading these other 4 routes. But that I'll end up leaving as an exercise.